Israel was in turmoil. The Midianites, a vast and ruthless enemy, ravaged the land like a swarm of locusts. For 7 long years, they plundered and oppressed, leaving God's chosen people in fear and starvation. Hope was all but lost until one man, an unlikely hero, was called upon by the Almighty. But Gideon was no warrior. He was a simple man, hiding in fear, doubting his own worth. And yet, God saw something greater in him. A divine messenger appeared before him with words that would change his life forever. But doubt clung to Gideon like a shadow. Though he had seen the angel, though he had heard the voice of the Lord, fear whispered in his heart.
Could I truly be the one to deliver Israel? Me, the least of my family?
Gideon knelt on the ground, carefully spreading out a fleece on the dry earth. He looked up at the sky, his voice quiet, uncertain, yet desperate.
Lord, if you are truly with me, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you said, then let this fleece be what would do in the morning, but let the ground around it remain dry. Then I will know.
He exhaled deeply, as if uncertain of what would come next. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Gideon rushed to the fleece. He breathed out heavily, not knowing what to expect. He reached out and touched it. His fingers sank into the thick wool, and water dripped down in steady streams. His eyes widened. He wrung it out into a bowl, filling it with water. But the ground around it, bone dry. Gideon stepped back, staring at the fleece. The evidence was undeniable, and yet doubt still gnawed at his heart. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair, wrestling with himself. Finally, he swallowed hard and looked to the sky once more.
Please, Lord, do not be angry with me. Let me test once more. This time, let the fleece be dry and the ground covered with dew.
Night fell again. The wind whistled gently, carrying the tension of the moment. Then the morning came. Gideon knelt, his hands trembling as he touched the fleece. This time it was dry, but the ground beneath soaked with dew. The air was thick with silence as Gideon stared, realization dawning in his eyes. It was unmistakable. The Lord had spoken. The signs were clear. Gideon could no longer deny his calling. The time had come to act. The once hesitant man now carried himself with purpose. With his doubts put to rest, Gideon sent messengers across the land, calling men to arms. And Israel answered. 32,000 men stood before him. Warriors, farmers, shepherds, all ready to fight. Hope flickered in their eyes. Could this be the moment? Could Israel finally break free from Midian's grip? Gideon had gathered an army, thousands of men willing to fight for their freedom. But before he could lead them into battle, the Lord spoke once more with an unexpected command.
You have too many men, Gideon. If I allow all of them to fight, Israel will boast that they saved themselves. I will show them that victory comes through me alone.
Gideon took a deep breath, then stepped forward, raising his hand to silence the murmuring crowd. The men fell quiet, waiting for their leader to speak.
Whoever is afraid, whoever trembles at the thought of battle, you may leave now and return home.
A heavy silence hung over the field. The men looked at one another, uncertain. Then, slowly, a few stepped back. Then more. Hesitant at first, but then with growing conviction, groups of men turned and walked away. Their swords hung at their sides, their shoulders slumped. A mass exodus began. When the dust settled, 22,000 men were gone. And just like that, Gideon's army was reduced to 10,000. The remaining soldiers stood in a tighter formation, now a much smaller force. He had lost many men, but 10,000 was still a sizable force, wasn't it? Then once again, the voice of the Lord spoke.
There are still too many, Gideon. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there.
At the Lord's command, Gideon watched them closely. Some fell to their knees, plunging their faces into the water, drinking eagerly. But others, only a few, remained standing. They scooped the water into their hands and drank cautiously, eyes scanning their surroundings. Gideon's gaze sharpened. He now understood. The warriors who drank with their hands remained alert, ever watchful. They were the ones who would fight with wisdom, not just strength.
Separate them, Those who lapped with their tongues like dogs, send them away. But those who drank with their hands, they will be your army.
The odds were impossible. Gideon's army had dwindled from 32,000 men to just 300. Against the countless Midianite warriors, it should have been hopeless. But the Lord had a plan, one unlike anything ever seen before. Gideon stood on a ridge overlooking the enemy camp. His face was tense, his grip on his sword tight. He glanced at his men, 300 warriors who had not turned away, who had not knelt in fear. They were watching him, waiting for his command. But still doubt whispered in his mind. Then the voice of the Lord came again.
Gideon, if you are still afraid to attack, go down to the enemy camp and listen to what they say. It will strengthen your hands for battle.
Gideon hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. He turned to his servant, Purah, motioning for him to follow. The two men moved carefully through the shadows, their cloaks wrapped tightly around them. They crept past guards and slipped between tents, their hearts pounding with every step. At last, they stopped near the edge of a tent, where two Midianite soldiers sat speaking in hushed voices.
I had a dream last night. I saw a loaf of barley bread tumble into our camp. It rolled into one of our tents and struck it so hard that the whole thing collapsed.
His companion stiffened, his voice filled with alarm.
That can only mean one thing. The sword of Gideon, the Israelite. God has given Midian and this entire camp into his hands.
Gideon's breath caught. His eyes widened as he exchanged a glance with Purah. The enemy was already afraid. The Lord had truly gone before them. Silently, they slipped away, hurrying back to their own camp. As soon as they reached the 300 waiting warriors, Gideon fell to his knees in the dirt, overwhelmed. He lifted his hands toward heaven.
Thank you, Lord, for you have already given us a victory.
Then he stood, a fire now burning in his eyes. He turned to his men and raised his voice with authority.
Rise up, for the Lord has delivered Midian into our hands.
The 300 men gathered around Gideon, anticipation and faith lighting their faces. But when he began handing out weapons, confusion flickered in their eyes. Gideon did not give them swords or shields. Instead, he placed a trumpet in one hand, and in the other, a clay jar with a torch hidden inside. No swords, no spears, no armor, just trumpets, clay jars, and torches. This was God's battle, and he would fight it his way. Gideon divided his men into 3 groups, positioning them around the enemy camp. The warriors crouched in the darkness, gripping their torches and trumpets tightly, their hearts pounding. Then, in the stillness of the night, Gideon raised his hand, the signal. In perfect unison, the 300 warriors shattered their clay jars. The torches inside burst into flame, lighting up the hills like an explosion of fire. The Midianite camp, startled from sleep, erupted in confusion. Then, as one, the Israelites lifted their trumpets and blew a deafening blast into the night air. The sound echoed across the valley, bouncing off the cliffs, magnified 100-fold. Chaos erupted in the Midianite camp. Soldiers stumbled out of their tents, weapons clattering to the ground. The firelight blinded them, and the overwhelming noise filled them with panic. In their confusion, they turned on one another, mistaking friend for foe. The once mighty Midianite army began to destroy itself from within. In the darkness, the Lord turned the swords of Midianite against one another. The battle had been won before a single Israelite had lifted a blade. Gideon and his men stood watching as the once mighty enemy scattered before them. Victory belonged to the Lord. But the victory was not yet complete. Gideon knew the enemy must not be allowed to regroup. The chase had begun. Gideon turned to his 300 warriors, his voice sharp with urgency.
Pursue them. Do not let them escape.
The Israelite warriors, though small in number, surged forward, their torches still burning, their trumpets still in hand. Their faces were set with determination. The enemy had been broken, but not yet destroyed. As the 300 chased the fleeing Midianites, Gideon sent messengers ahead to rally the nearby tribes. Riders galloped across the land, calling for the Ephraimites to cut off Midianites' escape at the Jordan River. The call was heard, and the Ephraimites responded. Hundreds of men took up arms and rushed to block the Midianite retreat. They intercepted 2 Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb, killing them and bringing their heads to Gideon as proof of their victory. The enemy was crumbling, their leaders falling one by one. But 2 kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, had escaped. Gideon would not rest until every last trace of Midianite oppression was wiped from Israel. They reached the town of Sukkot, where Gideon approached the elders, his voice strained but commanding.
Give my men bread, for they are exhausted, and we are pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna. The elders of Sukkot exchanged hesitant glances, then shook their heads.
Why should we help you? You have not yet captured the kings. What if Midianite returns and takes revenge on us?
Gideon's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with determination.
When the Lord gives Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will return and deal with you accordingly.
With no food, no rest, and no help, Gideon's men pressed on. They reached another town, Peniel, only to receive the same rejection. But still, they did not stop. At last, Gideon caught up to the enemy. Zebah and Zalmunna had gathered 15,000 men, what remained of the once vast Midianite army. But Gideon did not hesitate. He led his 300 warriors in a surprise attack, charging straight into their camp while the enemy still felt safe. The Midianites, caught off guard and still shaken from their previous defeat, panicked. Before they could even rally, Gideon's men struck with precision. The battle was swift, decisive. The last of the Midianite warriors fell, and their kings were finally captured. The kings of Midian had fallen. Their armies lay in ruins. The enemy that once tormented Israel was no more. Gideon returning victorious, the people of Israel gathered in celebration, lifting their voices in praise. The nightmare of Midianite rule was finally over. As Gideon stood among the rejoicing people, a new challenge arose, one that would test his humility. A voice of an Israelite elder from the crowd said,
"Rule over us, Gideon. Be our king, you, your son, and your grandson after you."
Gideon looked out at the people, at their eager faces, at their newfound freedom. And then he shook his head.
I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over you.
Gideon had been chosen not to become a king, but to lead Israel back to faith. And for the rest of his life, the land knew peace once more. Against impossible odds, Gideon and his 300 men achieved victory. Not through numbers, not through might, but through faith. It was a lesson not just for Gideon, but for all of Israel, that when God is on your side, no enemy is too great, no battle is too difficult. Subscribe for more biblical stories brought to life.